Take a moment and think about this, folks. Real Clear Politics average has Chris Christie at 3%, Pence 4%, Nikki Haley 3.2%, and they're plastered all over the corporate media, practically contributors at MSNBC and CNN. And then you have Robert F. Kennedy Jr., a Democrat. His RCP average is 13.2%, but the left-wing media is largely ignoring him. Why is that? Clearly, they have it in for Trump and want to promote everyone other than him, and it's the same thing for RFK Jr. He's an outsider and a threat to Biden. And what's worse, the DNC and Biden, the White House, still refuse to grant RFK Jr. a debate. And it's obvious why. He would expose them and Biden for what he is and what they are. And they're deeply fearful of losing their grip on power. Joining me now is that man, Democratic presidential candidate, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Robert, really good to have you on. So, you know, we had the debate last night at Fox. The numbers are staggeringly low, but we'll do that in a second. But why won't Biden, and I saw the White House come out yesterday and say he's not going to debate, he may not debate on the presidential level. Why won't he debate you?
I don't think he wants to debate me because I think, look, he has strategic reasons. He has strategic reasons, the same reasons that President Trump didn't show up at the debate. If your polls show that you're leading, then, strategically, maybe you're not. You think it's a disadvantage to debate people who are behind you. You mentioned my poll numbers are 13.3%, but that is a poll that looks at Democrats who voted last time. When we look at people who are likely to vote, for example, New Hampshire, we're getting numbers of me at 41 to President Biden at 51. And we're getting very, very high numbers in other states. I think South Carolina, I'm already at 24. So I think I'm way ahead of any of the people you saw in the debate last night in terms of their relationship to President Trump. I think I'm doing much better against President Biden. But you're right that the corporate media that is allied with the DNC are not really covering it.
So the RCP, Real Clear Politics, is an average. They take all the polls and they take the average of all of them. But as you point out, in the very important early states, the first three, maybe the first five, you're doing extremely well. So I can see why you're a threat. You're a threat to Biden. You're a threat to the DNC. You're a threat to the establishment Democrat machine, as Trump is to the Republicans. Let's talk a little bit about last night. You put out some research, some opinions today that says, and I'm reading, the GOP is out of touch. And you talk specifically about starting with Oliver Anthony. Can I ask you, is the GOP out of touch, or was Fox and the moderators out of touch?
Yeah, that's a good question, because it seemed to me that the debate really seemed surreal and tone deaf. It seemed like it was almost a rehash of all these sort of Reagan-era slogans of, I'm going to be tough on China, I'm going to be tough on Russia, I'm going to be tough on crime, I'm going to be tough on women who are trying to practice bodily autonomy. But the issues that I'm running into, and I have a really interesting base because my voters are a lot of Republicans, Independents, and Democrats. So I have overlapping bases with a lot of the guys that you saw debating last night. And I'm not hearing any of those concerns. Even, I have strong opinions on Ukraine, but the public is not really focused on that. They're focused on how to pay for food, gasoline costs, how to pay for childcare, how to get their kids out of the house into their own houses, which, is completely out of reach for children today. How to pay for pharmaceutical drugs and health care to keep themselves healthy. So, and we didn't hear any of that stuff. We now have last week, we're in a situation right now where the average income in this country has never been this way. The average income is now $5,000 less than the cost of living. Americans, in order to make up that deficit, are putting their debt on credit cards. And last week, we exceeded, for the first time in history, $1 trillion in debt in 3 years. We've added $330 billion, $1 trillion in credit card debts, and these American families are paying 22% interest on that, which is going ultimately to, these big conglomerates, BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. And it's this whole kind of mechanism of corporate corruption and collusion between the government and these huge corporations, which are also driving the Ukraine war and so many other things that are wrong with this country today. Kids cannot pay for houses. The housing costs have gone up from $200,000 to $215,000 2 years ago to $400,000 now, and the interest rates have gone from 1% to 7%. So that house, which was unaffordable 2 years ago, is now 10 times as expensive for a kid. And I'm running to get, into that generation, which are the same age as my kids. Nobody's buying a house. When we were that age, we were all figuring out ways to buy a house. Nobody talked about that last night. Nobody talked about how they're going to solve any of these problems for the declining middle class. There was not one policy offered, not one word about it, other than Oliver Anthony's song, which targets this directly, which they all paid homage to. But all of the issues he's talking about in that song about the depression and the despair and the deteriorating middle class, none of that was addressed last night. It was really, to me, it was surreal.
So, and I agree with you. It took, an hour to talk about the southern border. But you're right. Some of the economic issues that are number one on most Americans' minds never came up. This whole idea of lower inflation rates. Well, they're lower coming down from the highs, but they're still substantially higher than when Joe Biden took over. This Bidenomics idea. The interest rates are, people can't afford houses because interest rates are high to combat the higher inflation. Joe Biden goes to Maui, gives them $700, asks for hundreds of billions of dollars in foreign aid. Bidenomics is fit. Let me ask you this. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., why are they so afraid of you on your side?
Well, I'm getting a lot of resonance. I'm selling out. I'm filling up halls instantly within 3 or 4 hours of announcing events with huge crowds, enthusiastic crowds that are made up of Democrats, independents, and Republicans. And there's something happening. Like I say, my poll numbers in the states that I'm visiting, the early primary states, are now all of those states within shooting distance of the president. So, I think I'm a threat to that infrastructure, to that, that entire system. And by the way, I want to point something out, that these three giant companies, BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, they own 88% of the S&P 500. There's something wrong with that. And they've now targeted single-family homes. So the reason you're seeing these homes, go off the charts in price, so many people that and I know have had the experience that they're about to put an offer in on the home, or they put one in. Somebody swoops in with a cash offer and takes it away from them, and they try to figure out who it is. It's an LLC. Well, those LLCs are ultimately owned by those three big companies. And, they're on trajectory now to own 60% of the single-family homes in this country by 2030. There's a lot of things that we ought to be doing about that. We ought to be using the tax code so that they can't make a killing taking all the homes and then driving up the rents. And there's other things that we can be doing and making mortgages available, 3% mortgages to Americans with federal guarantees. None of that is happening. And nobody's even talking about what's really going on in this country, which is this corrupt collusion between state and corporate power that is strip mining the wealth from the American middle class and destroying the lives of the working poor in this country, where you do not have a chance anymore. The whole system is rigged against you. And those corporations, because of government collusion with these rich men north of Richmond, have their boots on the neck of every American. And, all these guys can talk about is what China's going to do to us and Russia and make up these bogeymen to keep the military-industrial complex in the cash. But what about what's really happening in this country, which is, the wealth is being stolen by corporations with the cooperation of these government agencies. And we need to start actually talking about the real issue, and it's not happening.
Well, you certainly have ideas that I'm guessing that they are afraid of because they're really, really good ideas. Actually, they're good ideas for either side of the aisle. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., thank you so much for joining us.
Eric, thank you for having me again. Thanks for letting me on to actually talk.
And you are a good talker, sir, and I'm sure you're going to look at the sky's the limit for you, my friend. The sky's the limit. Thank you so much.